Get out now before I call the cops on your dirty black ass. You deaf, boy? Stray dogs don't belong in hospitals. 10 surgeons came for that girl this week. 10 quit. You watched every single one walk out. And what? A homeless bum off the street thinks he can do that they couldn't? Yes. Hannah Unmargman. Her father has 14 billion. Flew in the best in America. Not one could save her. I can. I'm the surgeon you fired.
Every nurse in that hallway stopped breathing. What happened next inside that operating room would bring Whitfield Memorial to its knees. 3 years earlier, Bennett Dawson was a different man, 35 years old, attending pediatric cardiac surgeon at Whitfield Memorial Hospital, Manhattan, the only black surgeon on a 12-person senior surgical board, and the best hands in the building, though nobody liked admitting it. His specialty was the kind of work most surgeons avoided. Tetralogy of Fallot, hypoplastic left heart syndrome. The cases where a newborn's heart was built wrong from the start, where one wrong cut meant a tiny coffin. Bennett didn't avoid those cases, he requested them. His survival rate, 97.3%, was the highest in the department's history, higher than Hargrove's, higher than anyone's. But numbers didn't matter in a building where the walls had opinions. He'd walk into the surgeon's lounge and conversations would dip. He'd present a case at grand rounds and someone would ask him to repeat his credentials. Every single time. He'd scrub in beside colleagues who smiled at his face and questioned his judgment the moment he turned around. Bennett never complained. He just kept saving children. At home, he lived alone in a small apartment in Harlem. 1 bedroom, textbooks stacked on every surface. A framed photo of his mother on the nightstand, Ruth Dawson, a retired nurse in Baltimore who had worked double shifts for 20 years to put her son through medical school. She was 68 now. She called every Sunday. She prayed every night. And she believed in her son the way only a mother could, completely, stubbornly, without evidence or reason. 2 things Bennett carried with him everywhere. The first, a surgical timer. Old, scratched, analog. A gift from his mentor, Dr. Eleanor Voss, who had died of pancreatic cancer 2 years before. Engraved on the back, steady hands, steady heart. Bennett clicked it before every operation. A ritual, a prayer, a promise to the woman who taught him everything. The second, a black leather notebook. 4 years of research, hundreds of hand-drawn diagrams, the blueprint for a technique he called the modified Dawson shunt, a method to reroute blood flow in children born with impossibly deformed hearts. No transplant needed, no donor waiting list, just precision, patience, and a surgeon steady enough to cut paths where none existed. The notebook never left his side. Until it did. Victor Hargrove was not a bad surgeon. That was the problem. He was adequate. Competent enough to avoid lawsuits, polished enough to win board votes, connected enough to make his mediocrity invisible. 56 years old, chief of cardiac surgery. His father, a former state senator, had funded the hospital's East Wing. The Hargrove name was etched into marble above the entrance. That name carried more weight than any survival rate ever could. Hargrove didn't hate Bennett because Bennett was black. That would be too simple, too clean. Hargrove hated Bennett because Bennett was better than him. Every case Bennett won reminded Hargrove of every case he couldn't. Every standing ovation at grand rounds was a mirror Hargrove didn't want to look into. Bennett's existence was proof that Hargrove's position was inherited, not earned. Race wasn't the motive, race was the weapon. Convenient, familiar, easy to swing. And Hargrove swung it often. Gregory Ashford existed in a different universe entirely. 52 years old, real estate billionaire, net worth $14 billion. Whitfield Memorial's largest donor. He held 3 seats on the hospital board and had personally funded the new cardiac wing. His wife had died during childbirth 18 years ago, complications no one predicted. The baby survived. Lily. From that day forward, Ashford built his empire with one hand and raised his daughter with the other. Lily was everything. His mornings, his evenings, the screensaver on his phone, the reason he came home. Ashford was a man who controlled everything. Markets, politicians, boardrooms, nothing moved without his permission. He had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with the right number of zeros. Until now. Until his daughter's heart began to fail, and he discovered that $14 billion couldn't buy a surgeon brave enough to try. 3 men. 3 different worlds. A billionaire who had everything except the one thing he needed. A chief surgeon who had the title, but not the talent. And a homeless man who had nothing, except the hands that could save a life. Their collision was 18 hours away. The surgery that ended Bennett Dawson's career lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. The patient was Tommy Weston, 4 years old. Born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a condition where the left side of the heart was so underdeveloped it couldn't pump blood to the body. Without surgery, Tommy would be dead before kindergarten. Bennett had reviewed the scans 14 times. He'd mapped every vessel, every valve, every millimeter of tissue. He'd planned the approach down to the suture count. This was his case, his plan, his patient. But it was Hargrove's operating room. The gallery above OR4 was full that morning. Hospital board members, department heads, 2 visiting surgeons from Europe. Hargrove had invited them personally. He wanted an audience. 3 hours in, Bennett was ahead of schedule. The repair was clean. Tommy's vitals were stable. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm, the sound of a child being saved. Then Hargrove scrubbed in. He didn't ask. He didn't announce. He simply appeared at the table, gloved hands raised, and said 4 words. "I'll take it from here." Bennett looked up. "I'm in the middle of the anastomosis. If we switch hands now..." I said, "I'll take it." The gallery was watching. The board was watching. Bennett had no rank to refuse. He stepped aside. Hargrove picked up the scalpel. 40 seconds later, he cut the left pulmonary artery. Not the modified Blalock-Taussig shunt. The left pulmonary artery. A mistake so basic, so catastrophic, that every cardiac resident in the country would have caught it on a written exam. Blood filled the chest cavity in seconds. Bennett lunged back to the table, grabbed clamps, tried to repair. His hands moved faster than they'd ever moved. But 4-year-old bodies don't have blood to spare. Tommy's pressure dropped. Then his heart stopped. 41 minutes of resuscitation, Bennett's arms shaking, his voice cracking as he called for more epi, more blood, more time. At 11:47 a.m., Tommy Weston was pronounced dead. Bennett stood at the table for 6 minutes after, hands still gloved, blood still on his chest, staring at the smallest body he'd ever lost. Hargrove was already in the hallway, talking to the board. The disciplinary hearing lasted 90 minutes. Bennett lasted 3. The committee, 7 members, 5 appointed by Hargrove, reviewed the surgical report. The report Hargrove wrote. The video footage from OR4 had been corrupted due to a system malfunction. Convenient, clean, untraceable. Bennett stood alone at the table. No lawyer, no union rep, no one from the nursing staff willing to testify. Not because they didn't know the truth, but because they knew what Hargrove could do to their careers. The committee voted 6-1, termination, immediate suspension of surgical privileges, recommendation to the state medical board for permanent license revocation. Grounds, negligent homicide of a minor patient. Bennett stared at the paper. 4 years of research, 12 years of training, 9 years of saving children, reduced to 1 line on a disciplinary form. Hargrove was waiting outside the hearing room, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. The same posture a man uses when he's watching someone carry boxes out of a building he owns. "You were always a guest in this building, Dawson. Guests don't get to stay forever." Bennett said nothing. He walked past Hargrove, down the hallway, through the lobby, and out the front door of Whitfield Memorial Hospital for the last time. His black leather notebook, 4 years of the Dawson shunt research, had been confiscated as evidence related to the investigation. It never appeared in any official file again. 6 months later, Hargrove filed a patent application for a technique he called the Hargrove Cardiac Neo-Conduit. The diagrams were identical to Bennett's, every single page. 3 years is a long time to fall. First, the apartment went. No income, no insurance, no references. No hospital in America would touch a surgeon flagged for killing a child. Bennett applied to 43 positions in 18 months, 43 rejections. Some didn't even open his file. The words negligent homicide worked faster than any resume. Then the shelter. A cot in a room with 30 men, fluorescent lights that never turned off, the smell of bleach and desperation. Then the street. Bennett drank for a while, cheap vodka from plastic bottles, enough to make the memories blur, but never enough to make them disappear. Tommy Weston's face was there every time he closed his eyes, not because Bennett killed him, but because Bennett couldn't stop the man who did. He quit drinking on a Tuesday in November. No program, no sponsor, just a decision. He woke up on a bench in Central Park, looked at his hands, and made a choice. These hands would not rot. Every night after that, Bennett practiced. He found a sewing kit in a donation bin, used the needle and thread to stitch torn fabric. Over and over. Straight lines, curved lines, patterns so small you needed a magnifying glass to see them. He stole a pair of surgical forceps from a dumpster behind a medical supply store, used them to pick up grains of rice, and placed them into the neck of a glass bottle. One by one, for hours. His skin cracked, his knuckles scarred, his fingertips went numb in the winter cold, but his hands never shook, not once. The surgical timer stayed in his coat pocket. Dr. Voss's voice stayed in his head. Steady hands, steady heart. And the modified Dawson shunt stayed in his memory. Every angle, every measurement, every suture point. Because a notebook can be stolen, but knowledge can't. Every morning, Bennett sat outside the front entrance of Whitfield Memorial Hospital. Not begging, never begging, just sitting, watching doctors walk in and out of the building where he used to save lives. Some recognized him, most looked away. A few dropped coins at his feet without slowing down. One morning, a young resident, couldn't have been older than 28, tossed a handful of change in front of Bennett and said, "Get yourself a coffee, buddy." Bennett looked down at the coins, quarters and dimes scattered on the concrete. He looked up at the glass doors of Whitfield Memorial. His reflection stared back. Torn jacket, matted beard, hollow eyes. 3 years ago, he'd walked through those doors in a white coat. Now he couldn't walk through them at all. He picked up the coins. Not because he wanted coffee, because dignity doesn't pay rent and pride doesn't fill a stomach. It started with a helicopter. Bennett heard it before he saw it. The deep chop of rotors cutting through the Manhattan morning. Not a news chopper. Not police. Medical. The Red Cross on its belly caught the sun as it dropped onto Whitfield Memorial's rooftop helipad. 20 minutes later, a second one landed. Then a third. Bennett had sat outside this hospital for 11 months. He knew its rhythms. He knew what a normal Tuesday looked like, and this wasn't it. Black SUVs lined the emergency lane. Men in dark suits stood at every entrance. The lobby, visible through the glass doors, was full of people who didn't belong in a hospital. They belonged in boardrooms. Something was very wrong, or someone very important was dying. He was right on both counts. The nurses talked. They always did. Bennett's bench sat 6 feet from the ground floor break room window. Cracked open 2 inches for ventilation. Enough for cigarette smoke to drift out. Enough for words to drift with it. 18 years old, Ashford's daughter. DORV with subpulmonary VSD, Never seen anything like it. 10 surgeons already. Cleveland Clinic said no. Stanford said no. Greer from Hopkins just walked out. Hargrove's been in his office all morning. Won't come out. Bennett's hands stopped moving. The piece of fabric he'd been stitching fell to the ground. Dorv with subpulmonary VSD. Double outlet right ventricle. Both great vessels connected to the wrong chamber. Combined with a ventricular septal defect positioned directly below the pulmonary valve. 1 in 50,000. Maybe less. He knew this condition. He had spent 3 years of his life designing a surgery specifically for it. The modified Dawson shunt. His pulse quickened. Not from fear, from recognition. The way a locksmith's fingers twitch when he sees a lock no one else can open, and he built the key. Bennett stood up, then sat back down. Who was he going to tell? Who would listen? He was a homeless man in a torn jacket with no license, no credentials, and a disciplinary file that said he'd killed a child. Walking into that hospital would be the fastest way to get handcuffed or humiliated. Probably both. He looked at his hands. Scarred knuckles, cracked skin, dirt under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing fully removed anymore. These were not the hands of a surgeon. Not anymore. Not to anyone who looked at them. But underneath the scars, underneath the calluses, underneath 3 years of concrete and cold, the steadiness was still there. The muscle memory, the precision. 12,000 hours of training doesn't disappear because the world decides you're worthless. Bennett reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the surgical timer, ran his thumb across the engraving. Steady hands, steady heart. Then he heard it. A sound that cut through the traffic, through the chatter, through every excuse he was building in his head. Crying, not a child's cry. Something worse. The exhausted, broken sobbing of a young woman who knew she was running out of time. It came from the second-floor window. Thin, weak. The kind of cry that doesn't ask for help because it's stopped believing help exists. Lily Ashford, 18 years old, dying. Bennett closed his eyes, and behind his eyelids he saw Tommy Weston, 4 years old, blue lips, flatline. The child he couldn't save, not because he lacked the skill, but because a man with more power and less talent had pushed him aside. He opened his eyes. Not again. Bennett stood up, straightened his torn jacket, brushed the dirt off his knees, and for the first time in 3 years, he walked toward the front doors of Whitfield Memorial Hospital. He made it 9 steps past the entrance before security grabbed him. "Sir, you can't be in here." Bennett didn't resist, but he didn't stop talking either. He looked at the cardiac monitor mounted on the hallway wall, a display showing live telemetry from ICU beds. Bed 7, Lily Ashford. He read it in 2 seconds. That girl's oxygen sat just dropped below 68. Her right ventricle is failing. You might want to check her dobutamine drip before you worry about me. The nurse closest to him froze, looked at the monitor, looked at Bennett, looked at the monitor again. He was right. Before she could speak, the ICU door swung open. Gregory Ashford stepped out, eyes red, jaw clenched, the look of a man who had just been told, for the 10th time, that his daughter was going to die. Bennett locked eyes with him and said the words that would change everything. "I can save her. I'm the surgeon they fired." Gregory Ashford stared at Bennett the way a man stares at a hallucination. Red eyes, jaw locked, 17 hours without sleep. He'd just watched the 10th surgeon, Dr. Pamela Greer from Johns Hopkins, walk out of his daughter's room with the same look the other 9 had worn. Pity, disguised as professionalism. And now a homeless man was standing in his hallway claiming he could do what the best in America couldn't. Ashford almost turned away. Almost. Then Bennett spoke again. "DORV with subpulmonary VSD. The great vessels are transposed approximately 40 degrees. Her pulmonary artery is riding the septum. The right ventricle is doing the work of both chambers, and it's failing. No standard Rastelli procedure will work. The anatomy won't allow it. She needs a modified shunt that reroutes blood through a neo pathway above the conus. Ashford didn't understand half the words, but he understood one thing. This man had just described his daughter's condition in more detail than any of the 10 surgeons who'd been flown in on private jets. Let him talk. Security released Bennett's arms. They brought him to the 4th floor conference room. No invitation to sit, no water offered, just a long table, a wall-mounted screen showing Lily's CT scans, and 11 people staring at the homeless man who smelled like wet concrete. Bennett didn't wait for permission. He walked to the window, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking Central Park, and picked up a dry erase marker from the whiteboard tray. He didn't use the whiteboard. He drew on the glass. The left ventricle first, then the right. The aorta, displaced, riding the septum at the wrong angle. The pulmonary artery, malpositioned, connected to the wrong chamber. The VSD, a hole in the wall between the ventricles, sitting directly below the pulmonary valve. He drew Lily Ashford's heart from memory. Every vessel, every valve, every defect, 4 minutes. No hesitation, no corrections. When he finished, a young resident looked at the CT scan on the screen, then at the glass, then back at the screen. They were identical. Bennett had never seen those scans. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people realize they're watching something they can't explain. Then Bennett drew the solution. A curved line, the neo-conduit, rerouting blood from the right ventricle through a new pathway above the conus, bypassing the malpositioned vessels entirely. The modified Dawson shunt, drawn on glass in a conference room by a man who hadn't held a scalpel in 3 years. Dr. Pamela Greer was still in the building, waiting for her car. Someone had texted her. She stood in the doorway of the conference room, briefcase in one hand, reading glasses in the other, staring at the drawing on the window. My God! That's the Dawson shunt! The door slammed open 90 seconds later. Hargrove filled the frame. White coat, badge, the authority of a man who owned every room he walked into. His eyes found Bennett, and the color drained from his face. But only for a moment. He recovered fast. Men like Hargrove always do. Security, now! Get this man out of my hospital! He turned to Ashford. Professional voice, controlled, practiced. Mr. Ashford, I need to inform you that this individual is a disgraced former surgeon. His license was revoked 3 years ago for the death of a 4-year-old patient on my operating table. He is mentally unstable, potentially dangerous, and has no legal right to practice medicine anywhere in this country. Every word calculated, every word poison. Bennett stood by the window, silent, the drawing of Lily's heart still behind him. He didn't defend himself, he didn't argue, he just waited. Ashford looked at Hargrove for a long time, then spoke. Can you save my daughter, Dr. Hargrove? We are actively exploring every available yes or no. The situation is complex. There are factors. 10 surgeons gave me that same speech. 10. Every one of them explored options. Every one of them gave me factors. Ashford pointed at the glass. That man just drew my daughter's heart without looking at a single scan, so I'll ask once more. Can you save her? Hargrove opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That's what I thought. Bennett spoke for the first time since Hargrove entered. I'll operate. 3 conditions. Ashford turned. Name them. First, I choose my own surgical team. Every member, no exceptions. No one Hargrove appoints sets foot inside that OR. Done. Second, the entire operation is recorded. 4 cameras, 4 angles, no blind spots. Every second from first incision to last suture. Uninterrupted, untouchable. Ashford narrowed his eyes. He understood. This wasn't about documentation. This was about proof. Evidence that couldn't be deleted. Not this time. Done. Third, Bennett looked at Hargrove. He does not enter the operating room, not to observe, not to assist, not to breathe the same air as my patient. Hargrove exploded. "This is my hospital, my department. You can't—" "It's not your hospital." Ashford's voice dropped to a temperature that froze the room. "I own 3 seats on this board. I funded the wing you're standing in, and right now, my daughter is dying 30 feet from where you're throwing a tantrum." He turned to his assistant. "Get my legal team on the phone, now." 22 minutes later, Ashford's lawyers delivered the paperwork. Emergency temporary surgical privileges. Authorized under Joint Commission protocols for life-threatening situations where no credentialed alternative exists. Signed by the hospital CEO, countersigned by 2 board members. Legal, binding, airtight. Hargrove stared at the document. His jaw tightened, his fingers curled into fists at his sides. But he said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Bennett took the document, looked at it for a moment, then folded it and slid it into the pocket of his torn jacket, right next to the surgical timer. He turned to Greer. "I need you as first assist. Are you in?" Greer didn't hesitate. "I've waited 3 years to see this technique in an operating room. I'm in." Bennett nodded, then walked out of the conference room and headed for the surgical floor. Behind him, Hargrove pulled out his phone. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but from rage. He dialed a number, spoke quietly. 2 words. "Stop him." Dr. Pamela Greer caught up with Bennett in the hallway outside the surgical prep wing. Her heels clicked fast against the linoleum. Her briefcase was gone. Her car was forgotten. She grabbed his arm, turned him around. "I need to know something before I scrub in with you." Bennett waited. "Eleanor Voss was my colleague for 11 years. She talked about the Dawson shunt in her final lectures before she died. She said it was the most elegant cardiac innovation she'd seen in 40 years of surgery. She also said only one person on Earth could perform it. Her student. A young black surgeon she called the steadiest hands she'd ever trained." Greer studied Bennett's face. The beard, the hollow cheeks, the calm eyes that didn't match anything else about him. "She never told me his name, but she described the technique in detail. So I'm going to ask you one question, and if you answer it correctly, I'll know." Bennett nodded. "In the modified Dawson shunt, what is the maximum angle of the neoconduit relative to the pulmonary valve annulus?" No pause, no hesitation, not even a blink. 32 degrees. Any wider and you lose laminar flow. The blood becomes turbulent and the conduit wall erodes within 90 days. Any narrower and systolic pressure collapses the conduit within 6 months. 32 is the only number that works. I tested it on 47 cadaver models before I was sure. Greer exhaled, long and slow, the way a person breathes when something they've been searching for finally appears. This man isn't just familiar with the technique. She turned to Ashford, who had followed them into the hallway. He invented it. I'd bet my career on it. Word travels fast in a hospital, faster than any virus, faster than any code blue. Within 30 minutes, the story had spread through every floor of Whitfield Memorial. The homeless man in the torn jacket, the one security dragged through the lobby, was Bennett Dawson. Dr. Bennett Dawson, the surgeon who had been fired 3 years ago for killing a child. Except now, people were whispering a different version of that story. Nurses who had worked with Bennett came down from their floors. Not to watch. To remember. To say the things they hadn't said 3 years ago when it mattered. An OR nurse named Patricia Holloway, 63 years old, 31 years at Whitfield, hands that had passed instruments to more surgeons than she could count, found Bennett in the scrub room. He was standing in front of the sink, staring at the faucet, not yet ready to turn it on. She walked up beside him, didn't say anything at first, just stood there, 2 people sharing a silence that held 3 years of guilt and grief. Then she put her hand on his shoulder. We all knew, Bennett. Every nurse on that floor knew Hargrove cut the wrong vessel. We saw it. We watched it happen." Her voice cracked. "We just couldn't say anything. He would have destroyed us, the way he destroyed you." Bennett looked at her. No anger, no bitterness, just exhaustion, the kind that goes deeper than sleep can reach. "You're here now. That's enough." Holloway wiped her eyes, straightened her scrub cap. "I was the best scrub nurse you ever worked with, and you know it." For the first time in 3 years, Bennett Dawson smiled. "Yeah, you were." "Then let me do my job. One more time." He reached into his coat pocket, the torn jacket he'd worn for 1,000 nights on the street, and pulled out the surgical timer. Old, scratched, analog. The engraving still legible through the grime. Steady hands, steady heart. Holloway saw it, and her breath caught. "Dr. Voss's timer. You still have it." "Never let it go." He set it on the shelf above the scrub sink, clicked the button. The soft ticking filled the room. Steady, mechanical, relentless. Like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Bennett turned on the faucet. Warm water ran over his hands, scarred knuckles, cracked skin, dirt dissolving down the drain. 3 years of sidewalk washing away. Underneath, the same hands, the same steadiness, the same surgeon. While Bennett scrubbed, Hargrove worked. 2 phone calls. The first to the state medical board, an emergency complaint demanding they intervene and block an unlicensed surgeon from operating. He was told the board couldn't convene an emergency session before morning. Lily didn't have until morning. The second call went to a reporter at the New York Post. Hargrove fed him the story personally, every detail selected to maximize damage. Homeless man given scalpel in major Manhattan hospital. Billionaire father risks daughter's life. By the time Bennett finished scrubbing, the headline was already written. 18 hours. That's how long Lily had. The clock was ticking, the cameras were rolling, the media was circling, and the man who had destroyed Bennett's life was doing everything in his power to make sure it happened again. Operating Room 6, 4th floor, Whitfield Memorial. The room was cold, 62 degrees, standard for cardiac surgery. Cold slows bleeding, buys time, gives the surgeon an extra margin measured in seconds. Bennett had always preferred it at 61. Nobody remembered that except Holloway. She had adjusted the thermostat before he walked in. 61 degrees. The temperature of a man coming home. The team was small, 4 people. Bennett at the head of the table, Dr. Pamela Greer, first assist, across from him. Dr. Nathan Holt, pediatric anesthesiologist, 15 years at Whitfield, hands so calm they could thread a central line during an earthquake, at the head. Nurse Patricia Holloway, scrub nurse, to Bennett's right. Same position she'd stood in for 9 years before he was fired. 4 cameras, 4 angles, mounted on ceiling brackets, red lights glowing, recording everything. Bennett's one non-negotiable condition. Whatever happened in this room tonight, good or bad, would exist on tape. No deletions, no corruptions, no convenient system malfunctions. Not this time. Lily Ashford lay on the table, 18 years old, 91 pounds. Her skin had the gray-blue tint of a body not getting enough oxygen. Her lips were the color of a bruise. The anesthesia mask covered her face, and Holt's monitors showed what everyone already knew. This heart was running out of time. Behind the observation glass, Gregory Ashford stood alone, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his neck were visible from 20 feet away. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, hadn't slept in 3. The richest man in the building, the most helpless person in the room. Bennett looked at the surgical timer on the shelf beside the instrument tray, clicked the button. The soft ticking began. Steady hands, steady heart. He picked up the scalpel. First incision, let's bring her back. The sternotomy was clean. Bennett split the breastbone with the oscillating saw, a sound like a dentist's drill amplified through a megaphone. Retractors spread the chest. And there it was, Lily Ashford's heart. It was worse than the CT scans showed, much worse. The great vessels were tangled, transposed at nearly 50 degrees instead of the 40 the imaging suggested. The pulmonary artery wasn't just malpositioned, it was fused to the septal wall by a band of fibrous tissue that shouldn't have existed. The VSD was larger than predicted, and the right ventricle, the chamber doing the work of two, was swollen, exhausted, beating with the desperate rhythm of a muscle that knew it was dying. Greer leaned in. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Bennett, it's worse than we planned for." Silence. Every person in that room held their breath. Behind the glass, Ashford pressed both palms flat against the window. The surgical timer ticked. Bennett stared at the heart for 30 seconds, the longest 30 seconds of his life. His eyes moved across every vessel, every ridge, every millimeter of tissue, reading it the way a pianist reads a score. Not just the notes, the spaces between them. Then he spoke. Calm, flat, certain. The shunt angle changes from 32 to 28 degrees. The neoconduit entry point shifts 3 millimeters lateral to avoid the fibrous band. We adjust and proceed. Greer looked at him. "You're recalculating the entire approach? Right now? In your head?" Already done. He reached for the 7-0 Proline suture, threaded it under the surgical microscope at 4.5x magnification. Each stitch spaced exactly 1.5 millimeters apart. The needle moved through tissue thinner than wet paper. Hour 1 became hour 2. Hour 2 became hour 3. Bennett didn't speak, didn't shift his weight, didn't ask for water. His hands moved with the mechanical precision of a machine. Except machines don't feel. And Bennett felt everything. This was the core of the Dawson shunt. The part that existed only in Bennett's mind and a stolen notebook. The neoconduit, an artificial pathway made from harvested pericardial tissue, had to be shaped, positioned, and sutured into a space no larger than a walnut. The angle had to be exact. 28 degrees. Not 27, not 29, 28. 1 degree off and the blood flow would turn turbulent. Turbulent flow meant erosion. Erosion meant death. Not today, but in 3 months, 6 months. A time bomb sewn into a teenager's chest. Bennett built it millimeter by millimeter, suture by suture. His fingers moved under the microscope with a steadiness that made Greer stop breathing. She had operated with the best cardiac surgeons in America. She had never seen hands like this. Hour 5. The conduit was 3/4 complete. Then the monitors screamed. Lily's heart stopped. Flatline, the long, unbroken tone that every surgeon dreads, the sound of a body giving up. Holt's voice cut through the alarm. "VFib! She's in VFib! Paddles?" "No." Bennett's voice didn't change pitch, didn't rise, didn't crack. "Internal cardiac massage. I need 90 seconds. He reached into Lily's open chest, both hands, cupped her heart, a heart no bigger than his fist, and began to squeeze, rhythmic, steady, the way he'd practiced on cadaver models 100 times. Except this wasn't a model. This was a girl whose father was watching through glass. Ashford slammed both fists against the observation window. The thud echoed through the OR. Holloway flinched. Greer flinched. Holt flinched. Bennett didn't. He counted out loud, each compression a number, each number a second. 15, 16, 17. Ashford was screaming something behind the glass. No one could hear the words. 31, 32, 33. Greer watched the monitor. Nothing. Flat. Dead. 50, 51. Holloway's hand trembled above the instrument tray. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. 70. 71. Holt shook his head slowly, reached for the defibrillator paddles, preparing for the call no anesthesiologist wants to make. 85. 86. Nothing. 88. Bip. One beep. Faint. Almost imaginary. 89, bip, bip. 90, bip, 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 bip. Sinus rhythm. Weak but present. A heartbeat returning from the dead. Holt exhaled so hard his surgical mask fogged. Greer closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Holloway set down the instrument she'd been holding and pressed her palms flat on the tray to stop the shaking. Bennett removed his hands from Lily's chest, looked at the monitor, looked at the heart, picked up the needle driver, and continued operating. Without a word. The neo-conduit was complete. The rerouted pathway was holding. Blood was flowing through it, slowly, cautiously, the way water tests a new riverbed. One connection remained. The final anastomosis, where the neo-conduit joined the pulmonary valve annulus. The tissue at the junction was 0.3 millimeters thick. Thinner than a sheet of paper, thinner than a human hair is wide. One tremor, one wrong angle, one excess gram of pressure, and it would tear. And if it tore, the bleeding would be unsurvivable. The OR was silent. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the surgical timer, ticking on the shelf where Bennett had placed it 11 hours ago. Steady, relentless, faithful. Holloway dabbed the sweat from Bennett's forehead. She didn't ask, she didn't wait, she just did it. The way she'd done it 1,000 times before, in 100 surgeries, in another life. Bennett positioned the needle. 7-0 Proline. Curved, the finest suture manufactured for human surgery. Under 4.5x magnification, the needle tip looked like a sword. The tissue looked like fog. He held his breath. The needle entered the tissue, slow, controlled, the way a man threads a needle through silk. Except silk doesn't bleed, and silk doesn't die. Through, hold, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, letting the tissue accept the suture without tearing. Then the pull. Gentle, millimeter by millimeter. Complete. Bennett tied the knot, looked at Greer, nodded. Release the clamp. Greer turned the valve. Blood entered the neo-conduit, flowed through the new pathway, reached the pulmonary valve, entered the lungs. The oxygen saturation monitor began to climb. 72%, the number Lily had lived with her entire life. 78, 84, 91, 95, 98. For the first time in 18 years, Lily Ashford's heart was doing what a heart is supposed to do. Greer whispered, "It's working. My God, Bennett, it's working." Behind the glass, Gregory Ashford's knees buckled. He slid down the observation window until he was sitting on the floor, his forehead pressed against the glass, his shoulders shaking. $14 billion. And the only thing that saved his daughter was a man who didn't have a dollar to his name. Bennett looked at the surgical timer. 11 hours, 7 minutes, 23 seconds. He clicked the button. The ticking stopped. Steady hands, steady heart. The operating room erupted. Greer clapped. Holt pulled off his mask and exhaled 3 years' worth of tension. Holloway covered her mouth with both hands and wept. Bennett stepped back from the table, pulled off his gloves, looked at his hands, scarred, cracked, exhausted, still steady. While Bennett saved Lily Ashford's life, Victor Hargrove tried to destroy the evidence of it. At hour 3 of the surgery, Hargrove called the NYPD's Midtown South precinct, reported an unlicensed individual performing surgery at Whitfield Memorial, requested immediate intervention. Ashford's legal team had anticipated this. They had already filed a preemptive injunction with a federal judge. The police were told to stand down. At hour 7, the moment Lily's heart stopped, Hargrove watched the flat line on the remote feed from his office. He leaned back in his chair, smiled, reached for his phone to call the reporter at the Post. The headline was already forming in his mind. Homeless man kills billionaire's daughter on operating table. Then the heartbeat came back, and Hargrove's smile disappeared. At hour 10, he made his final move. He walked to the hospital's server room on the basement level. Badge access. He knew the system. He'd used it before. 3 years ago, when he deleted the footage of Tommy Weston's surgery. He reached for the recording terminal. The security camera above the door captured everything: his face, his badge, his hands on the keyboard. Hospital security arrived 45 seconds later. They found Hargrove standing at the terminal with the deletion prompt open on the screen. He hadn't pressed enter yet. But the intent was on tape. And this time, nobody was going to delete it. Lily Ashford opened her eyes on a Thursday morning, 48 hours after the surgery. The breathing tube had been removed 6 hours earlier. Her vitals were stable. Her oxygen saturation held steady at 97%, a number she had never seen on her own monitor in 18 years of living. The first thing she saw was her father, sitting in the chair beside her bed, unshaven, unwashed, still wearing the same suit he'd worn for 3 days. His hand wrapped around hers, the same way it had been since they wheeled her out of the OR. She blinked, swallowed. Her throat was raw from the tube, her chest ached, deep structural pain, the kind that comes from having your breastbone split open and wired back together. But underneath the pain, something was different. Warmth. Her fingers were warm, her toes were warm, her lips, for the first time in her memory, were not blue. "Daddy?" Ashford's head snapped up. His eyes were swollen, red, destroyed by 72 hours of terror and 3 minutes of crying harder than he'd cried since his wife died. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." "My chest feels warm," Ashford broke. Not the controlled, dignified grief of a billionaire managing a crisis, the raw, ugly, gasping kind, the kind that doesn't care who's watching. He pressed his forehead to her hand and sobbed. He found Bennett in the hallway 2 hours later. Bennett was sitting on a bench outside the ICU, still in surgical scrubs, head tilted back against the wall, eyes closed. Not sleeping, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after 11 hours of holding a life between your fingers. Ashford stood in front of him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Gregory Ashford, a man who had never bent his knee to another human being, a man who bought companies and broke markets and answered to no one, knelt down. On the hospital floor, in front of a man who 24 hours ago didn't have a roof over his head. "You gave me back my daughter." Bennett opened his eyes, looked down at the billionaire kneeling before him, and said quietly, "You gave me back my operating room." Neither man moved for a long time. The video from the server room was the first domino. Hospital security flagged it within an hour. Victor Hargrove, badge number visible, face fully lit, standing at the recording terminal with a deletion prompt open on the screen, attempting to erase the footage of the surgery that just saved Lily Ashford's life. The same way he had erased the footage that killed Bennett Dawson's career 3 years earlier. Whitfield Memorial's board of directors convened an emergency session the next morning. The investigation lasted 11 days. What it uncovered was worse than anyone expected. The surgical video from Tommy Weston's operation, the footage Hargrove claimed was lost to a system malfunction, had been manually deleted from Hargrove's personal login. 43 minutes after Tommy was pronounced dead, the disciplinary report that ended Bennett's career had been altered. The original, recovered from a backup server Hargrove didn't know existed, told a different story. One where Hargrove took control mid-procedure. One where Hargrove cut the wrong vessel. One where Bennett tried to fix the damage and ran out of time. And Bennett's black leather notebook, 4 years of the modified Dawson shunt research, was found in the bottom drawer of Hargrove's desk. The patent application Hargrove had filed 6 months later, the Hargrove Cardiac Neo Conduit, contained diagrams traced directly from those pages. Line for line. Hargrove was terminated on a Tuesday. Security escorted him out with a cardboard box and a police escort. The state medical board revoked his license within the week. Charges followed: obstruction of justice, falsification of medical records, fraud, and involuntary manslaughter in the death of Tommy Weston. He was arrested at his home in Greenwich, Connecticut. Cashmere robe, handcuffs on his own front lawn. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. Nobody came outside. Bennett Dawson's medical license was reinstated following a 4-hour expedited hearing. The state medical board issued a formal apology, the first in its history directed at an individual physician. Gregory Ashford filed construction permits within 72 hours. A new pediatric cardiac surgery center, Upper East Side, Manhattan. The name above the entrance, Dawson Voss Pediatric Cardiac Center. Bennett accepted the position of director of surgery on one condition: 30% of all procedures free of charge for uninsured children. Ashford didn't negotiate, he said yes. The stolen notebook was returned in a sealed evidence bag. Bennett opened it that night in his new office. Same pages, same handwriting. He placed it on the shelf beside the surgical timer, where it belonged. Bennett called his mother 3 weeks later. Ruth Dawson picked up on the first ring, she always did. He talked for 40 minutes. She listened without interrupting, the way she'd listened to every call from medical school, from residency, from the shelter, from the street. When he finished, the line went quiet. Then Ruth Dawson, 68 years old, retired nurse, the woman who believed in her son when the world turned its back, said 6 words. "I always knew, baby. I always knew." 6 months later, Lily Ashford ran in Central Park, full stride, lungs open, heart pumping the way a heart is supposed to pump. She had gained 11 pounds. Her cheeks had color. Her lips, for the first time in her life, were pink. On her bedroom wall hung a watercolor painting she'd made during recovery. A man in a torn jacket holding a small round object, rough colors, off proportions, but at the bottom, in careful block letters, "My Hero." The modified Dawson's shunt was published in the New England Journal of Medicine 14 months after Lily Ashford's surgery. Peer-reviewed, validated, recognized as a breakthrough in congenital cardiac repair for cases previously classified as inoperable. Within the first year of publication, 143 children across 9 countries underwent the procedure. 139 survived. 4 did not. But those 4 had been given a chance that didn't exist before Bennett Dawson sat on a sidewalk and refused to let his hands forget what they were made for. The Dawson Voss Pediatric Cardiac Center performed 61 surgeries in its first operating year. 18 of those were pro bono, children from families who couldn't afford insurance, let alone a hospital bill. Bennett operated on every single one personally. His torn jacket still hangs in his office, not framed, not displayed under glass, just hanging on a hook behind the door. The same hook where his white coat hangs beside it. He keeps them together. He says it's so he never forgets. Nobody who works at the center believes that's the real reason. They think he keeps the jacket because it reminds him of something else. That talent doesn't expire. That skill doesn't rot. That the world can take your title, your license, your home, your name, but it cannot take what your hands know. The surgical timer still sits on the shelf in OR 1. Every morning before every operation, Bennett clicks the button. The ticking fills the room. And somewhere, Dr. Eleanor Voss smiles. If you were in Bennett's shoes, homeless, stripped of everything, knowing you could save a life but the world says you're nothing, would you have walked through that door? Tell me in the comments. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that your worth isn't decided by the people who threw you away. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this. We find them so you can feel them.